Welcome on in, football fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS preview for Week 5 of the NFL season. Have been in the lab the last day or so, getting ready to bring you our top stacks and our top props of the week. So here in this video, gonna quickly go through both of those and make sure you're ready to get after tomorrow's slate. So we'll go through some of the better game environments that you might want to target for your DFS lineups, and then towards the end of the video, we're gonna go over to Underdog and on Prize Picks and bring you 3 or 4 props that you might want to keep an eye on yourself. So without further ado, a lot to get into. Let's go ahead and start it off with our top 3 stacks of the week. We'll be starting this off a little bit chalky, but kind of like what we had in week 1, it doesn't really always matter. In week 1, we had the Chargers and Dolphins game that was overwhelming chalk, but also by far the best game environment on that slate. And I wanted to get some exposure there, but also didn't want to be in line with 20-30% of the field that was going out there and stacking the Chargers. So my solution, go out there and play Tua at slightly lower ownership, and of course use the Chargers as buybacks. And that week nearly took down GPPs. The winner in GPPs all had Tua stacks, so that was a pretty good pivot, right? Something that worked out in one of these can't miss kind of game environments. And here with the Chiefs and the Minnesota Vikings, undoubtedly going to get a lot of attention, but kind of like that week 1 matchup, one that I think you're going to see 50+ points scored, if not closer to the potentially even 60+ points mark. And in those kind of matchups, you're going to have 3, sometimes 4, 5 GPP viable pieces in them, and the correlation is just through the roof. So this is a game that I'm looking to get access to, but kind of look what we did there for that week 1 matchup. I'm looking to do it in a little bit more of a unique way. And though Patrick Mahomes himself is going to be extremely popular at 12.9%, at the same time, a lot of his pass catchers are going extremely overlooked. And it's not because people don't want to get there. It's more so because there's so many bodies on the Chiefs to feed. And I mean, even over there on the Vikings, right? A bunch of buybacks that you can use, that all the different combinations for stacking really make it easy to get different to the field, right? Just throw in 1 or 2 of those low-owned plays that are still seeing plenty of snaps, have plenty of opportunity for the Chiefs. Hope that they can score a touchdown, right? I mean, it's not a given that they're going to get there, but if you can get that right combination of touchdown scores, that's how you could get into the GPP viable lineup. So we'll talk about some of the potential pairing options here in a second, but what I like about this game is whether you're taking the Patty Mahomes side, right, adding a pass catcher or 2 that's relatively low owned, or even taking the Kirk Cousins side and using that as a stack at slightly lower ownership. I really think this is a game environment to be well over the field on. So let's start with the stacking options for the Chiefs. So obviously Travis Kelce is the most obvious option here, but unfortunately comes with by far the highest ownership. So at 20% ownership, also $7,600 price tag, which is definitely up there for the tight end position. He's a shoo-in, right? I think he makes plenty of sense for your lineups, but unfortunately, he's not going to do it from the game theory angle. So if you're starting a lineup with Mahomes and Kelce, first off, that's a lot of salary that you're investing, and I'm by no means against that, right? But just know what you're walking into, but you're also going to have to find some differentiation for your last pick there. So the wide receivers, I think, are a little bit more intriguing. So first off, we go down here to, I believe, Sky Moore is the most expensive wide receiver that we have here on the Chiefs. So he's here at $4,400. So obviously this position a lot more cheap than going to somebody like a Travis Kelce at tight end, but also only 1.3% owned. Let's go through a few more options, right? Marcus Valdes-Scantling, right, is 0.8% owned. Kadarius Toney is 1.4% owned. Now their projections aren't great, right? 6.6 points for a Toney. I mean, 5.6 points for an MVS, right, is far from optimal. But even, Rashee Rice, right, 9.7 points, only $3,600 is a little bit more chalky, though, I have to say, right? Like 10% owned are all options that you can mix in. I mean, we have Justin Watson down here, who I probably shouldn't have blacked out, but he's $3,400. Another option that you could potentially mix in, or of course, even going to the running backs, you could use a Pacheco, or my personal favorite, potentially even using Jerick McKinnon as a stacking option. So it's gonna feel ugly, right, using Mahomes, potentially using like Travis Kelce as, right, your one chalky stacking option, but then mixing in, right, the McKinnons, the Sky Moores, the potentially even a Toney getting there, right, to 15, 20 fantasy points is what I think you could use to get different to the field, but also have a ton of exposure to what I think is by far the best game environment. On top of that, the buybacks are plentiful and really easy to choose from. You've got TJ Hawkinson, who's going to get some ownership there, but only 6.2% owned, a lot because of the attention that's going to Kelsey. In terms of Justin Jefferson, his price tag is way up there, but it's almost always worth taking that price tag with the kind of performances that he's been posting. But you have Jordan Addison you could play. You have KJ Osborne you can mix into a few lineups. Alexander Mattison you could take at running back, right? Running back are always fine for buybacks. Just a ton of different options to choose from. Now, if you need to get a little bit different, let's say you started Mahomes, Kelsey, even if you took a pivot, right, with that third player on the Chiefs, you're probably still looking for a little bit of differentiation. Well, Jordan Addison works for that, right? He's only 2.6% owned. Or if we go down here and take a KJ Osborne, right, he's 1.8% owned, right? You're getting exposure to what could be an absolute shootout out there. Vikings are home, by the way, which I think having the Vikings, right, the team that's far inferior to the Chiefs as the home team, right, is only going to help this game environment, right? Hopefully make it a little bit more competitive than it otherwise would be. And they're in the dome in, up there in Minnesota. There's a lot of shootouts played there, right? I don't know what it is about domes. People seem to love playing in domes, whether it's for kicking conditions, throwing conditions without the winds out there. KJ Osborne, right, Addison, those sort of players are ways that you could further add to that leverage. So like I said before, right, there are going to be extremely chalky ways to stack this game. I mean, if you went like, let's say you started like Kirk Cousins and then went like Justin Jefferson, maybe Hawkinson as your second player, and then ran it back with like a Rice or a Kelsey, like you're going to run into duplicate city, right? That's like 5-6 spots right there that you're, hogging up with your lineup. They're going to all be like 10% plus owned. All you have to do, right, to make this kind of lineup viable is add in at least one of those sub 3% owned players, right? Probably two, right, if you want to play the large field GPPs to go out there and get that differentiation, which is far from suboptimal. I mean, you got to play maybe one or two plays that you're going to be like, I don't love that, right? Like, you're not going to love playing Addison at that price, right? His points per dollar isn't great, right, at 1.8x. Even like a Sky Moore, right, down here, $4,400. You don't feel great about that 1.72x, but all it takes is a touchdown, one play for those players to get there. And when they have Patrick Mahomes throwing them the ball, that opportunity is always going to be there. So I like the stack. I think it makes plenty of sense. It's one that I'm definitely getting to. Next up, we got this Joe Burrow stack going against the Arizona Cardinals. And I might be a slappy that just likes getting back to this, Joe Burrow thing. Maybe I'm living in the past from the last few years. But, the last few years tell us that he is one of, if not the best fantasy quarterback when it comes to breaking slates. And against the Arizona Cardinals defense, that is far from special at this point, right? I think it could be a decent spot. And I know a lot of people would point to the T. Higgins injury, him potentially sitting as being a negative for this offense. I think in terms of overall point total, right, it probably does negatively impact them, right? Not having a star wide receiver like a Higgins out there. But at the same time, it consolidates the target share, right? So if this offense does get there, if it does put up a lot of offensive production, which is really just a ticking time bomb at this point, right? The Bengals offense on paper is one of the best in the NFL. They're going to go out there and break the 30-point mark here at some point. So, and if that happens without a T. Higgins, right, that offense is even more attractive. The main reasoning is that, the funnel, the targets get funneled to the top targets, right? And those are going to be a Jamar Chase, who already has a massive target share. But on top of that, Tyler Boyd, starting tight ends, running backs might even get more targets than what you're used to seeing. So, you don't have a ton of stacking options, right? You could go with, some of the third, fourth string wide receivers for the Bengals if you wanted to. But these top four players here, Chase, Boyd, Smith Jr., and Mixon, are going to have a massive increase in workload. So I love that. I like the fact that they're going to have a chance for an even higher target share out there. And the buybacks, I don't think they're necessary in every lineup, right? I think you could just go out there and stack three Bengals players and move on. But you have James Conner, Marquise Brown, Rondale Moore, Zach Ertz that are all options to potentially explore. But then again, I don't think that one is as necessary as what you have in this Vikings game, right? Like, I think this game might shoot out. You might see like 50, 60 points scored. If the Bengals go out there and absolutely trounce the Cardinals, right, I wouldn't be surprised by that either. But one thing to note is that they have been surprisingly competitive in all their games so far. The Cardinals, that is, of course, a lot of people thought they'd be tanking this year, pretty much trying to lose every single game to get Caleb Williams. But that clearly hasn't been the case, right? They've gone out there, they've shown some fight. So if you buy into that narrative, right, these buybacks may be a little bit more intriguing, and it also puts the pressure on the Bengals, right, to go out there and keep their gas, I should say their, pedal on the metal, as some people would say, right? Go out there, continue to be aggressive. So I like that, especially if the Cardinals show a little bit of fight. But yeah, Joe Burrow, especially at this kind of price tag, is just primed to go out there and break out. But I think I've said the same thing the last 2 weeks, and it hasn't worked out. So like I said, I might just be a slappy for going out there and blindly trusting him. But, long-term pedigree for me, whether it's for golf or it's over here playing NFL DFS, I'm always going to take a little bit more seriously than short-term form. Now, we're week 5 of the season, right? If this continues for another week or so, then we might have to revisit that conversation. And lastly, the last stack we'll go through here is going to be the Matthew Stafford stack, going against a really tough Eagles defense. And the ownership right now is at 6.4%. I have to say 8.3% on Burrow isn't non-existent, right? But you're not talking about mega chalk out there. But with Stafford, I expect that ownership number to go down. Going against a ferocious defense like the Philadelphia team normally draws a lot of people away from stacking a certain offense. And, Matthew Stafford, I know the price tag's great. The points per dollar value, even at a very conservative projection here, is one of the best numbers on the slate. Hopefully a lot of people, jump off of that, right? See that Eagles defense, just go, oh, I can't stack that offense against that kind of defense, and leave us really what I think is a super high upside spot. So a few reasons to be optimistic here, right? First off, Rams offense has been a lot better than what people thought they were going to be. A few reasons for that. Kyren Williams has been a huge bright spot. That's why they traded away Akers. They knew that they liked Kyren that much. They wanted to get him the ball more. That makes a lot of sense now that we've seen that actually play out. On top of that, you had Puka Nacua go out there and break out, and now you have Cooper Kupp coming back, right? So you have what I think is a pretty complete offense. I know a really tough defensive matchup, but the line here isn't out of hand, right? You've got the Rams team going on the road here, and even if they get beat, right, even if they're losing by 2 touchdowns, that just puts them in the pass first mode, right? If they're getting killed, right, as long as, this team's able to post like 21 plus points, you could very well see them being GPP viable, right? Especially because Stafford is as cheap as he is. Some of the receiving options outside of a Nacua and a Kupp up here are really cheap on that team. You could spend up at running back if you want to in those kind of lineups. You could spend up for an elite tier wide receiver naked if you wanted to take that kind of lineup too. There are just a lot of different options, right, when stacking a Matthew Stafford. So you got Kupp here I've got playing on Sunday. You can see he's still questionable right now, but only projected for 15.3 points. Nacua taking a little bit of a hit in his projection too, right, down to 16 points, but you can see I have him projected for just slightly more work than Kupp. A couple reasons for that. Nacua's healthier, right? He has that going for him, but also he's had a lot of the reps with him this year, right? Obviously, Kupp has been on the sideline for quite some time, so maybe not completely acclimated to the offense. But either way, I think both are decent GPP plays because they aren't garnering much ownership. But where I get a little bit more intrigued, and where I think, people aren't going to focus if they're playing a Stafford, right? All of them are going to be like, oh, do you take Nacua or do you take Kupp, right? What if the answer is neither, right? What if it's not taking either of those? Maybe you take one of them, right? Mix him into a lineup, but it's Tutu Atwell that wins you the slate, right? Do I dare say a Van Jefferson? Now, that's like a throw up in your mouth kind of play, right? This is like a 0.1 percentile kind of outcome, but like a Tyler Higbee, right? A little bit more realistic out there, would say, right? At $4,100, maybe he goes out there and breaks the slate with an Atwell, right? All of those are distinct possibilities, right? Especially like a Tutu Atwell that is such a down the field kind of threat. I'm tempted by these stacks, right? Kind of like what we had with the Mahomes one. Even if the ownership does stay a little bit higher on Stafford, right? We go out there and we take some of the lower owned options to pair up with him when we can still make it a GPP viable lineup. In terms of your buybacks, you have plenty of options on the Eagles. We have those 2 elite tier wide receivers you could use as a buyback because of how cheap the Rams offense is, especially if you avoid, right, Nacua and Kupp together. You could definitely take A.J. Brown as a buyback. Devonta Smith at $7,400, easily affordable too. You can mix in a few of the tertiary wide receivers for the Eagles, but DeAndre Swift, I think, makes plenty of sense, especially only $6,000. Another pretty affordable option. And then at tight end, Dallas Goedert, I think $4,200 is an absolute steal. So points per dollar projection maybe isn't popping as much as like a Zach Ertz there, but still only 9.8% ownership on a player that has one of the bigger roles and one of the more efficient offenses in all of the NFL. So I would say this middle stack, right, with Joe Burrow, maybe you don't have to have a buyback with the Cardinals, but here with Matthew Stafford, I would almost certainly have one of these Eagles players as a buyback. And with this Patrick Mahomes game, what are you doing, right, if you're not taking a few Vikings players for some buyback action there? In terms of props, I've got 3 or 4 that you might want to keep an eye on. So first off, a little 3-legger over here on Underdog. They've got Chris Moore under receptions, Devin Achane over, was it 50.5 rushing yards? That one heavily juiced towards the over, and also TJ Watt over half a sack. So first off, the Chris Moore prop is juiced -144 over on FanDuel. At Draftkings, I think it was like -130 as of last check. Was -125 a little bit earlier, so probably something in that range. But more importantly, he hasn't hit this line all year. He has Kyle Phillips likely returning for the Tennessee Titans too. I know that Treylon Burks isn't playing, so he has that kind of working against him. But at the same time, he's a player that doesn't get many targets, right? Most of his targets are down the field, so he doesn't always convert his targets into catches, and more of like that big play kind of threat, right? And in a slow-paced game against the Colts, right, a team that also likes to move the ball on the ground, this is the type of situation where I feel like, you know, Chris Moore, right, probably doesn't even get 3 targets, right? Even if he does, you know, get 3-4 targets, he's not always going to convert that into 3 catches. So the sort of play here that I like taking the under on, obviously FanDuel, a little bit more so than DraftKings seems to agree with that, and that's why I'm mixing that one in. I was considering taking receiving yards. That was already bumped down twice, I believe, from 30.5 yards to 29.5, and I believe right now he might even be at 27.5 yards. So kind of missed the boat on that one, myself included, actually. That number moved rather quickly, but this receptions number hasn't been bumped, right? It's been stagnant at this number all week. It's the juice, right, that just continues to build up on the underside for us. Next up, we've got this Achane prop. He's at 50.5 rushing yards. The New York Giants, right, have not been really good this year, right? The Dolphins are likely going to kick their, butt this week. I was going to say it a little bit more ferociously there, but say we'll kick their butt there. We'll, leave it up to interpretation. Maybe the Giants pull off a massive upset. But in terms of your script, right, obviously favoring Miami dominating the ball, right, dominating that time of possession, and you can see that reflected with the sportsbook odds. A lot of people seem to be betting the Achane over here. He's dominating more targets, more receiving targets even than somebody like Mostert, which I don't think is something we expected to happen so early. And then the rushing game, he's been far more efficient than Mostert and is starting to earn even more of the target share at the rushes. So through the air, right, obviously helping you out, but not going to help us out with this prop, but he's just been on the field more. And given that he's averaging like nearly 10 yards a rush, now we're not going to expect that out there this week, right? If he gets 10 plus touches, right, he's almost a shoe-in, right, to go over this 50.5 mark. So I like that for him, especially if the Dolphins play out the script that we expect, right, them playing from ahead. So another prop that I'm mixing in. And the last one we've got is a TJ Watt over on sacks. And I think this is just a underdog problem here because they don't post guys at sacks at like 0.75 sacks. At least to my knowledge, I haven't seen that on the board yet. And that's really his projection on books, right? He's at 0.75 sacks on Prize Picks, all the different sports books out there. On Prize Picks, there's no juice involved, but on DraftKings, sites like Caesars, for example, he's upwards of -130 for over 0.75 sacks. And something to consider about this 0.5 sack prop is that he could get half a sack, right? That's something that happens with the sack stat. If you haven't seen that before, look it up, do your research. It's a part of sacks. If you share it with another player, you each get half a sack. So that happens quite a bit. I think a lot more than what people realize. And if he happens to go out there and get a half a sack rather than a solo sack, right, we're going to push over here on Underdog. He's got, again, a lot of odds to go over, right? He's -130 for over 0.75. So here at 0.5, you've got to like it even more, right? We have that push equity in our pocket. A tie if he goes out there and gets screwed, right, by someone else stealing his full sack. And then we can go out there and obviously have the over equity. You can go out there and sack Lamar Jackson. And anytime you're playing against a rushing quarterback, that is going to increase a pass rusher's chances of going out there and getting a sack. As a lot of times they'll scramble out, try and, extend the play. And whether it's running out of bounds and getting credit for the sack that way, or of course just getting tackled during the extension, a lot of times these pass rushers, especially more athletic ones like a Watt, will end up getting a sack that way. All right, and over here on Prize Picks, I'm mixing in a little three-man card as well. First off, we got the same A-Chain prop, right? Same Chris Moore prop, so not going to explain those again. But the under on Allen Robinson, another plus EV prop that is juiced about -135 on books towards the under, and a really tough matchup against the Baltimore Ravens, right? Steelers-Ravens is always an extremely ugly game, usually relatively low scoring, sometimes right medium to higher scoring, but always close. And with how inefficient the Steelers offense has been, right? Now it's a Steeler fan telling you that. First off, fire Matt Canada, get his ass out of town. Completely agree with that. But Allen Robinson has hardly even gone over this line this year. He's not seeing that many targets from Kenny, seemingly is the number 3 wide receiver on this team. With Deontay Johnson out. When Johnson returns, which isn't going to likely happen this week, but even if it did, right, he'd be the number 4 wide receiver on this team. So at 29.5 yards and what is going to be a windy and ugly game between two extremely physical teams, I like the under, right? The odds reflect that, right? You usually want to double check that, right? Kind of check your homework out there, check your answers, make sure you're on the right track. And when I saw the -135, -140 line over there at Caesars, made this an absolute shoo-in. So yeah, over here in Prize Picks, of course, you don't get a full 6x payout for a power play. So if you do want to enter this over here, you can. Unfortunately, right, Allen Robinson is bumped down on Underdog. So I did take that earlier in the week. I did have this 3-man card in there, so I was able to get that prop in. But unfortunately, if you want access to that Allen Robinson prop, you're going to have to do it over there on Prize Picks. So maybe something you could do is, right, take out one of these 2 props, right, just run 2-mans because you're going to get a full 3x payout for that, which is identical to what you'd get over there in Underdog. So maybe that's the best way to go out there and play that kind of slip. That's all I've got for the Week 5 preview. Before you hopping out of here, first off, smash that like button for me. And also comment down below who you've got as your top player for DFS this week. So whether it's a stacking option, whether it's just a naked player that you think is going to break the slate, go ahead and comment down below who that'll be. And if you go ahead, get that player correct. So if you're picking a stack, if it ends up being the top stack, or if you go out there and pick the top scorer for the fantasy slate, you will win a free month of the Patreon. So make sure to enter down below, helps us out with the algorithm, and gives you a free chance to earn that Patreon month. So appreciate the support here, guys. Best of luck with those lineups this week, any prop slips that you're entering, and maybe we go out there, cash a few lineups, cash a few slips, and add to the bankroll a little bit. So until next time, like I said, appreciate the support, and I'll catch you guys for our live streams throughout the week.